Okay, for curiosity's sake and everything else, we're gonna try to tear this down a little bit further, this vertical engine, take a look around. I already removed the fittings on the cylinder for the water, so I could do that over the sink and drain the water out. So the radiator here is empty. Can I actually get the fuel tank off? What's that? Nope. It's this one. And then because I ran this hose through the mount on the fuel tank there to make it look good. Pop that off. Go now. Still get some water running around there, and I keep moving this a little bit closer to the camera so it's out of frame. Get the spark plug out. This screwdriver is a like $2 Harbor Freight screwdriver, and it turns out one side is the correct size for the spark plugs on these engines for the sockets, so that's really convenient. I tried to move over onto this light because I know the lighting on the last time I did this was not great, and it just changed the way the lighting went bad. But this is definitely low-rent pandemic YouTube, so I'm not interested in buying a new camera or getting a lighting setup for this right now. There's a ton of carbon buildup. I think I had to run it a bit rich last time. The top of the piston doesn't look too bad. Now, next up is the cylinder. So these nuts are 7mm. The banjo fittings are 9mm. And the way the cylinder is held on is they put the wet sump together, and then there's a stud, and then the cylinder mounts on the studs, and the nuts then hold it in place. That's going to be an interesting thing. On the side here, you can see that nut is not got enough clearance to come out because of the bracket for the push rod. These two nuts are out. And then, this one is coming out with the stud. So when we get that out, we'll have to Loctite the stud back in first and then put it back together. And that stud is very long. Exciting. But far enough up, I can get this other nut off and out of the way. There we go. All right. There's that stud. Quite long there. Looks like it's about halfway in on the casting, or on the base though. And then the bracket for the push rod is just silver soldered up to fit on there like that. And then inside the piston, the bottom end here is very filthy because of the wet sump there and splashing oil around. And this has the same push that liner out. And we can see in there the very top where the cylinder bolts go in, it's solid in there. And then the banjo fitting on the side for the top is the top of the water jacket. So that's good. Design in there. It's stayed sealed this whole time. I don't feel like there's any water getting into it, but let me wipe out the inside of the cylinder bore here. Try to find a way to show that in the top edge of the cylinder here and matching on opposite sides, there is scoring from the wrist pin, just like I found on the ET1. So it looks like the fact that the wrist pins on the piston are not are floating. They look like they float to either side. Although this piston, unlike the ET1, has a little chamfer around the side, so that's nice. A new detail compared to the old one. But I'm gonna just push that wrist pin out. And the piston itself is starting to get matching scoring from the cylinder walls because of that wrist pin rattling going back and forth. So I'm going to have to get my Dremel and do a little bit of polishing a little bit on the side there. And you can see the bottom of the piston does knock back and forth because it's got wear around there that's uneven. But it's otherwise in pretty good shape here. Now we can see in there there's plenty of oil in that wet sump left, but I'm peering down in there and I thought I had a lot more oil in the body of the down in there, so I'm kind of curious. It must blow by the piston and get out somehow, also through the bearings on the side of the crankshaft, because that's not because they're not like sealed bearings in any way. They're just, you know, the press fit like the other engines. So but otherwise looks pretty good in there. So I'm trying to debate whether I should try to fill that up. Although what I should really do is pull this whole thing off the base and find out if there's actually a gasket around the bottom there, because I bet if there's no gasket it's actually just leaking oil out the bottom real slowly. So trying to unscrew these mounting lags, because this engine is mounted with lag bolts and not with full length, or not with cap screws running through the base. Now, because the wires for the sensor and the oh, that's the thing I forgot. Got to get that ground lug off of there. Duh. Oops. And that nut is very tiny. It's not even, looks like 5mm. Alright. Let's see if this ground lug will just... Yes, I can hold that nut with my finger while I unscrew that ground lug from the top. It's like there's no chance that's the right size. Nope. Alright. There. Alright, now turn to the side there. And just pop the bottom plate off here and take a quick look. Oh, look at that. There's not an open bottom on this, so it is a solid sump. That's a lovely, lovely thing to discover. Okay, well, now I know the oil doesn't leak out of it, it just blows by the piston. So if there's a groove on there there is a groove on the piston for a second ring, and I have spare rings, I will try putting a second ring on there and see if that helps stop the blow-by. Because in a modern engine, well, and even an engine of this age, there typically would be at least 2 rings, just because they'd be specialized, of course, or they'd be specialized in modern engines, but in old engines they just used 2 rings, typically identical, because not only did it help hold compression, but they would reduce the amount of oil that would blow by into combustion chamber. So once you had a sealed sump like this, you could be concerned about keeping the oil in it, and having 2 rings would help keep the oil from blowing into the combustion chamber as quickly and getting burned off, especially as the rings wore out. So set that back down, and I had that tipped over enough the oil did get out, and it's pretty dirty, but I didn't see any particles in it, so I'm guessing that's all just carbon. Get all these studs back in. Alright, so I'm going to take quick stock of what we have going on here. I'm going to get reassembly stuff together to do odds and ends with this before it gets put back together, and do the little tune-up. But this is the end of the disassembly and teardown that I'm going to do to look around, because I could tear this further apart and have to retime it, but you know, it's always easier to leave the timing on an engine than it is to have to retime it. So I'm gonna stop recording now and be back when I have the Dremel and some other, well, at least a bit of wet and dry sandpaper, so that I can get the scoring out of the cylinder a little bit, and grab the other second piston ring. So I'll put a second piston ring on there and see if that helps keep the oil in. There's also the vent in this here, so it might just be or might just be putting oil vapor out the vent. So anyhow, but we'll try and stop that oil from going down so fast. There's my button.